Hello everyone. In this presentation, we're going to discuss what is the difference between inflation and stagflation. Now, just to quickly summarize, inflation is actually an increase in the money supply vis-a-vis the increase in goods, services, and financial assets in the economy. So, if the increase in money supply is much more than the increase in goods, services, and assets in the economy, it indicates inflation. And hence, price rise or price increase is just a subset of inflation, not the entire inflation definition per se. So now, what is stagflation? Stagflation is a condition of slow economic growth or high unemployment, which is accompanied by a high or rising inflation, usually expressed in the form of higher prices of goods and services. So basically, stagflation can be called as a specific case of inflation, wherein, like in inflation, there may be growth in money supply or credit. However, in this specific case, this is accompanied by a decline in goods and services, a supply of goods and services, or at least a dramatic slowdown. Now let's quickly compare inflation and stagflation before we go into the details. So growth in the economy usually involves an increase in credit or money supply, which increases demand and is inflationary in the short term. We'll just see how it is in the next slides. This inflation is usually expressed by increases in prices of goods and services. Now, if this increase in demand and inflation doesn't trigger an increase in supply of goods and services, that is, increase in growth, then the rise in prices leads to a fall in demand, which leads to a further fall in economic activity, thus resulting in credit destruction or money destruction, leading to ultimately lower inflation. So, in other words, a normal economic cycle by itself can resolve the situation of a normal inflationary scenario. Now, in stagflation, ironically, it involves an increase in credit or money supply relative to growth employment, or in other words, economic growth. So, growth and employment in the economy decline or slow down dramatically in a stagflationary scenario, even as the money supply increases, leading to higher inflation, again expressed by increase in prices of goods and services. So unlike in normal inflationary scenario, which gets resolved on its own, a stagflationary scenario is usually not self-curable easily. Now, let's see how this money or credit generated in the system is inflationary, at least in the short term. So, with this credit, the person sets up a factory, has built an infrastructure to in turn build products later on. Also using that money, he invests some of that money in real estate, because of which the prices of real estate rise. Also, he gives out salaries to his employees or to his workers who build that factory, employees who start working in that factory. That means that till now, once he does all this, he sets up the factory, gives salaries to people who build that factory or who starts working in that factory, invests in real estate, all these steps have yet to contribute to the increase in supply of goods and services, while the money has already been created and distributed in the system. So there is demand because of that, but the supply has yet to come, which means there is inflation in the system, which goes up. Of course, after some time, after a lag, supply will come, which will bring down the inflation. And that is why growth and employment, increase in employment opportunities is inflationary in the economy, at least in the short term. Let's have a look at a scenario. Here, let's say a very important product in economic activity somehow observes a supply decline. That means the prices of that great input product would rise. A rise in prices would increase the cost of production of the goods in the economy. That would mean to produce the same amount of goods, you need more credit. So the credit requirement actually goes higher. Whereas that would mean that for the same amount of supply, there is a price rise in the economy. Now, because of the price increase in the economy, in a normal economic course of action, what happens? The demand correspondingly goes down. Now, as the demand goes down, so does the supply of goods in the economy. And when the supply is going down, that means the credit requirement in the economy or the money supply in the economy also correspondingly goes down. In other words, demand goes down, supply goes down. So when the production is down, the money required to produce the goods are down. It means the unemployment in the economy rises, as you no longer require the same amount of manpower to produce goods. So unemployment rises, and that would mean that in the short term, the price is rising. Inflation is not really rising, because there's a difference between inflation and price rise. And again, I would refer to the presentation on inflation, where the link is in the description. Inflation is the rise in money supply relative to the goods and services of the economy. Price rise is just one of the consequences of inflation. So overall, inflation does not really rise, as in the medium term at least, the credit or the money supply, as you've seen, is going down. Growth slowdown? Yes, the growth slowdown occurs. Stagflation is not occurring in a normal course of economic action. However, let's take the same scenario, and this time let's introduce a factor. So here also, like previously, the demand for goods and services comes down because of the increase in prices. However, unlike previously, this time around the central banks intervene in the market and reduce the interest rates. As a result of which, unlike previously again, when the credit or the money supply reduced in the economy, this time because of the reduction in interest rates, the credit or the money supply in the economy either remains the same or more likely increase in the economy. Now this credit or money supply doesn't go into the factories to produce more goods, because the demand for those goods and services are lower, and hence they don't produce any real employment, but they go into sectors other than that. They go as a tool for wealth transfer to the producers of the commodity that has seen a supply shock. So there's a wealth transfer happen from the consumers of that commodity to the producers, or they go into the asset markets. Can be financial assets, can be real estate, which bloat in prices. This is where the price increase happens, and it filters down into the economy further. So the supply of real goods and services don't really increase and rather come down as a response of lower demand. Since the supply of real goods and services come down, no longer the same manpower is required as previously, and hence the unemployment in the economy goes up. So, in other words, inflation in the economy, yes, it goes up. Why? Because the credit relative to the supply of goods and services in the economy increases. Unlike previously, this time the price increase happens in the medium term, so it's more sticky. If you notice, the last time when there was no central bank intervention, the price increase was only short-term phenomenon. There is certainly, as we see, a growth slowdown. So the growth is coming down, employment opportunities are coming down, inflation is increasing, and hence we see stagflation in the economy. Let's take a second scenario. Here, the government increases its fiscal deficit by the crowding out phenomenon. Kindly check the presentation on the crowding out for more details, link in the description. Here, the government increases its fiscal deficit, or in other words, increases its expenses over the revenues that it receives by issuing debt. This debt is bought by the domestic private investors in the market. So in other words, little new money is created, and out of the same pool of money, the government extracts a greater amount. That means, in other words, crowding out is occurring on the monetary side. What does that translate to? Well, since out of the same pool of money, the government is taking more, interest rates rise in the economy. That means that for the private sector, the interest rates are rising and the amount of credit availability for the private sector is coming down. However, the overall credit in the economy is still the same, or may even rise a little, but certainly still the same. It's only for the private sector that it has come down, as the government is extracting more of its share. That means the investment in the private sector comes down, or in other words, the supply of goods in the economy comes down, even as the demand increases. And why is the demand increasing? Because the government is spending more. So demand increases, and since the private sector is investing less, the supply either remains the same or more likely comes down. So have a look at the scenario. The overall credit in the economy is either the same or slightly increases. Demand is increasing, but the supply in the economy is most likely coming down due to the lack of private sector investments. And hence, there's price rise in the economy. Inflation is possibly rising in the economy. Growth is certainly coming down because of lack of supply in the economy, new supply in the economy, and employment opportunities. And so, stagflation is hitting the economy. So we have seen two scenarios where stagflation is occurring in the economy. One, where in the wake of a supply shock, the central bank intervenes, and here the government intervenes by increasing its fiscal deficit. So let's sum up our presentation. Inflation mostly occurs as a result of increase in credit growth, thereby leading to more growth and employment opportunities in the economy, which leads to more supply of goods and services in the economy, which then ultimately reduces the inflation. Stagflation occurs as a result of increase in credit growth, even as, in this case, the growth and employment opportunities decline in the economy. Hence, unlike in a case of normal inflation, stagflation is not curable due to the natural economic cycle, as there is hardly any increase in supply which can cure stagflation. Now, inflation can also strike due to the course during the course of a normal economic business cycle due to malinvestments, which again can get corrected by a bout of economic recession or can become worse due to wrong government and central bank policies. To know details on this, kindly check the presentation on inflation. The link will be given in the description. Now, stagflation strikes the economy when either the central bank interferes through its loose monetary policy at a time of supply constraint, as we saw, due to some extraneous circumstances, or the government interferes through its wrong fiscal policy, that is funding fiscal deficit by, let's say, the crowding out phenomenon, as we saw in the slides before, which increases the demand in the economy, however, at the same time limits the access to cheaper funds for private sector to invest. Thus, this reduces supply of goods and services in the economy even as the demand increases, and hence the relative credit in the economy increases. Stagflation, unlike inflation, which can be cured in many cases through the normal economic business cycle, stagflation can be cured by cutting down credit supply, reducing fiscal deficit, or a combination of both, depending upon the reasons why stagflation occurred in the economy in the first place. For details, again, do check the link in the description of this presentation. So thank you very much for watching this presentation. Do subscribe if you like such content and comment in case of any questions. Thank you.